She took the sniper rifle, carefully feeling its cold weight in her hands. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. The world around her seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. She could hear the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds settling in for the night. But beneath it all, there was a tension that pulled tight in her chest. Her fingers traced the worn edges of the rifle, a tool she had trained with for years, yet today it felt different, heavier somehow, as if carrying the weight of what was to come. She glanced at the men around her, the others quietly preparing, checking their gear, whispering last-minute details to one another. But she was focused on the task ahead, her mind racing through the mission, briefing they had been given only hours before. The target was hidden deep within the enemy lines, a high-value individual whose capture or elimination could turn the tide of the conflict. The intel was clear but incomplete, and she knew that out here beyond the safety of their base, nothing was ever guaranteed. She looked toward the spotter standing beside her, a seasoned veteran whose job was to provide the critical information about distance, wind speed, and any sudden changes in the environment. He gave her a brief nod, signaling he was ready, and she settled into position, her body moving with practiced ease to steady the rifle against her shoulder. The world shrank down. To the small scope before her eyes, the faint outline of the target barely visible through the lens. Her breath slowed to steady the movement of her chest and heart, beating steady in the quiet. But even in this stillness, her senses were alert too. Every sound, every shadow, every movement. A soft breeze stirred the dry grass at her feet, and the sun slipped further behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The light was fading fast, and with it, her window to make the shot. She adjusted her position slightly, keeping low and hidden behind a crumbling stone wall, the cold, rough surface grounding her in the moment. The spotter raised his rangefinder, his hand steady, despite the urgency of the situation. His eyes scanned the terrain, his lips moving silently as he calculated the distance, time, and angle. The radio crackled faintly with updates from their command, but the signal was weak, leaving them isolated in this precarious moment. She could feel the weight of expectation, pressing down on her every second, counting down like a heartbeat in the dark. Her mind flicked back to the countless hours of training, the drills, the endless practice shots that had brought her to this moment. She was ready, but ready did not mean certain, and the uncertainty clawed at the edges of her resolve. Suddenly, a faint noise caught her attention, a soft crack just beyond the ridge. Something moved in the shadows. Not the target, but something else. Something alive and watching. She tightened, her grip tightening the strap of the rifle across her chest. Her eyes flicking toward the spotter who had gone silent, eyes narrowing in suspicion. The world seemed to hold still. Then the spotter spoke low. Words meant only for her. The range was clear, the wind steady, but the noise had thrown off his calculations, and he ripped off his headset in frustration. The tension exploded between them, a silent warning that the mission was no longer just about the shot, but survival itself. Her heart hammered, louder in her ears as she fought to steady her breath. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, and every muscle was coiled ready for the next move. But the unknown presence in the shadows was closing in, and with it the fragile calm of the moment shattered into shards of doubt and danger. She glanced at the spotter whose eyes flicked toward the ridge, his jaw clenched in determination. The faint glow of the last light slipped away, leaving them in the creeping darkness. The mission had just begun, but the real challenge was only now becoming clear as the shadows deepened and the first whispers of danger drew closer. The silence stretched taut between them, broken only by the soft hiss of the wind and the distant cry of a lone bird. The sniper rifle was heavy in her hands, but it was her only hope. a lifeline in the void of uncertainty. Her mind raced with possible scenarios, the worst case unfolding in vivid detail, but there was no turning back, no second chance to hesitate. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the rising tide of fear and doubt. This was her moment. The moment she had trained for, the moment when all the noise of the world faded and only the mission remained. Her finger hovered near the trigger. The spotter's voice, now a quiet anchor in the dark, urging caution, focus, precision. And then from the darkness came a sudden movement, a flash of something slipping through the underbrush just beyond the edge of the clearing. Her eyes locked on the spotter, who motioned urgently, signaling danger. Their eyes met for a brief moment, filled with unspoken words and a silent promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. She tightened her grip, pulling the rifle closer, her breath shallow but steady. The target was still out there, somewhere hidden in the fading light, but the presence in the shadows was closer now, more certain, more dangerous. The tension coiled tighter, waiting for the moment when everything would explode. Into action, time seemed to slow as the darkness swallowed the last light. The sniper rifle felt alive in her hands, a conduit for everything she was and everything she hoped to be. The spotter lowered his gaze away from the ridge, signaling a brief window of opportunity, but the weight of the unknown hung heavy in the air. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the silent countdown to what would come next. The mission was far from over, and the night was only just beginning. The spotter checked the rangefinder again, his eyes scanning the terrain beyond the ridge. The faint glow of twilight was fading fast, and the shadows grew longer, darker. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm about to break. His fingers moved swiftly over the device, calculating the distance, wind speed, elevation, every variable that could affect the shot. He glanced sideways at the sniper. Her eyes were sharp-focused, steady. Despite the growing uncertainty, the weight of the rifle in her hands was like a promise, a tool for precision and power. But he knew that even the best rifle and the steadiest hands could be undone by the unexpected. The spotter adjusted the headset once more, but the radio crackled with static. No new orders, no reassurance, just the oppressive silence of the field. The enemy was close, and they were moving fast. His mind raced through the options, calculating risks and consequences. A whisper in the back of his mind warned that something was off, something more dangerous than they had prepared for. He ripped off the headset. Suddenly his jaw clenched tight, his breath shallow. The gesture was fierce, urgent, like a silent shout. He looked back at the sniper, their eyes locking for a moment, filled with unspoken warning. The mission was no longer just about the target. It was about survival, about what was lurking just beyond the ridge. The sniper shifted slightly, keeping low, her body tense, ready. The rifle was steady, an extension of her own will, but the cold bite of fear crept in at the edges of her focus. She could feel the pressure building, the weight of every second that passed without action. The unknown presence in the darkness was closing in, and with it a threat they had not seen. Suddenly the faint crack of a twig broke the silence. From the far side of the ridge, the spotter froze his hand, moving to signal the sniper to hold, her breath caught in her throat as she waited, her eyes searching the dimming landscape for the source of the noise. The moment stretched thin, fragile. As if the smallest movement could shatter the balance, a shadow flickered in the corner of her vision, and she turned just in time to see a figure slipping through the underbrush. The spotter whispered a warning, but the words were lost in the rush of adrenaline. The figure moved quickly, agile, silent, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The sniper aimed her rifle, adjusting the scope. The spotter called out corrections, his voice low, steady, but urgent. Their coordination was seamless, a dance of precision and trust. But the figure vanished behind a cluster of trees, leaving only the faintest trace of movement behind. The spotter cursed under his breath. The enemy was using the darkness to their advantage, moving like ghosts through the terrain. The calm they had counted on was shattered, replaced by a rising tide of uncertainty and danger. They were outnumbered, outmatched, but retreat was not an option. The sniper felt the cold grip of fear tighten around her chest, but she pushed it aside, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. Her finger hovered near the trigger, the rifle, a lifeline in the growing chaos. The spotter raised his rangefinder again, eyes darting across the landscape, searching for the target and the threat that stalked them. The radio crackled suddenly. A voice came through, faint, urgent warning about enemy reinforcements closing in. The team was compromised and extraction was no longer guaranteed. The spotter looked at the sniper, the weight of the news. Settling between them like a dark cloud, they had to make a choice: fight or flee. But neither seemed safe. The sniper took a deep breath, steadying herself against the rising tide of fear and doubt. She had trained for moments like this when every decision could mean life or death. But the unpredictability of war was a brutal teacher, and the lessons were written in blood and sacrifice. A sudden movement caught their attention. A flash of light, a distant muzzle flare signaling the start of an engagement. The spotter shouted a warning and the sniper squeezed the trigger, the shot echoing through the valley, a sharp crack in the quiet night. The bullet found its mark, but the battle was far from over. The enemy returned fire, their positions revealed by the muzzle flashes. The spotter called out coordinates, directing the sniper where to aim, but the chaos was overwhelming. The darkness was filled with shapes and sounds that made it impossible to distinguish friend from foe. The sniper moved quickly, shifting position. The rifle a steady presence in her hands, the spotter covered her, providing critical information about the enemy movements. Their teamwork was the only thing standing between them and disaster, but the odds were against them. Suddenly, the ground shook from the impact of an explosion nearby. The sniper was thrown off balance, but she caught herself quickly. Her heart raced as the danger closed in faster than they could react. The spotter was shouting now, his voice strained, urgent, desperate. They needed to withdraw, but the path back was blocked. The sniper made a split-second decision, aiming her rifle toward the closest threat. The shot rang out again, cutting down an enemy advancing through the shadows. The spotter grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward cover, their eyes meeting in a silent promise to survive. The night was alive with gunfire and chaos, the mission unraveling with every passing second. The sniper and spotter fought to hold their ground, to protect each other, and the fragile hope of completing what they had started. But the darkness was relentless, and the enemy was closing in fast. They moved together, slipping through the shadows, each step measured, careful, silent. The spotter checked the rangefinder again, calculating a path of escape. The sniper covered him, firing when necessary, each shot a lifeline in the deadly game of cat and mouse. The radio crackled. One last time. A voice breaking through the static, calling for immediate extraction, but the coordinates were too far and the time was running out. The spotter looked at the sniper, the weight of the situation heavy in his eyes. They had to make a choice, one that would define everything. The sniper took a final breath, steadying herself, ready to face whatever came next. The spotter tore off his headset once more, a fierce gesture of defiance and desperation. Their mission had changed from hunting a target to surviving the night and the shadows that threatened to consume them. The darkness pressed in around them, thick and suffocating as they moved through the broken landscape, every step taken with cautious precision. The sniper could hear the crunch of dry leaves beneath her boots, the distant howl of a night creature, and the faint but ever-present murmur of the enemy closing in. Their breath was shallow, their senses sharpened to a razor edge, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. The spotter led the way, eyes scanning constantly for threats. He moved with practiced stealth, a ghost in the shadows, guiding them toward a narrow ravine that might offer temporary shelter. The sniper followed close behind the cold metal of her rifle comforting against her shoulder, but even its weight was a reminder of the danger that stalked them. A sudden rustle to their left froze them both in place. The sniper raised her rifle, aiming toward the sound, her finger trembling just slightly on the trigger. The spotter whispered a warning, and they both held their breath, waiting for the next move. The world seemed to slow the tension so thick it was almost visible. Out of the shadows emerged a figure not enemy, but a young local, man eyes wide with fear and urgency. He motioned urgently, beckoning them to follow. The spotter exchanged a quick glance with the sniper, calculating the risks, but they had little choice. The man might be the difference between survival and death. They moved swiftly, following the guide through a maze of rocky outcrops and dense brush. The sniper could feel the weight of every moment, the adrenaline surging through her veins, but also a growing sense of hope that this strange ally might lead them to safety, or at least a chance to regroup. The night was no longer just a backdrop, but a living entity filled with unknown dangers. The spotter kept low, his gaze flickering between the guide and the surrounding darkness. The faint sound of footsteps behind them told of pursuers relentless and unforgiving. The sniper kept her rifle ready, every sense alert to the slightest movement or sound. The path was treacherous, steep, and narrow, forcing them into a single line, vulnerable yet determined. Suddenly, the local stopped, signaling for silence. His finger pressed to his lips as he pointed toward a faint glow in the distance. The sniper squinted, trying to make out the shape through the dark. The spotter whispered, "It was likely an enemy outpost or a patrol moving through the area." The guide gestured to a narrow crevice between two boulders, a potential hiding spot. They slipped inside the cramped space, holding their breath as shadows danced on the walls, illuminated by the distant firelight. The sniper's heart pounded in her chest. The confined space, a stark contrast to the open terrain they had left behind. Minutes passed like hours as they waited silently, the only sound the faint drip of water echoing through the crevice. The spotters' eyes never stopped moving, scanning every inch of darkness outside. Their breaths formed small clouds in the cold air, and the sniper fought to control the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm her. Suddenly, a sharp cry shattered the silence, a signal or a warning from the enemy. The spotter cursed low and pressed his hand against the sniper's arm, urging her to get ready. The moment of confrontation was near, and there was no turning back. The sniper steadied herself, drawing on every ounce of training and willpower. They slipped out from the crevice, moving quickly toward a ridge that might offer better vantage and perhaps a chance to call for extraction. The night had become a battlefield. Every shadow, a potential threat. Every sound a warning. The sniper's fingers wrapped tightly around the rifle. The spotter's voice low and steady, directing her movements. As they climbed the ridge, the distant sound of engines grew louder. The radio crackled, suddenly alive with the voice of the extraction team, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The spotter answered quickly, giving their position and pleading for immediate pickup, but the terrain was rough and time was not on their side. The sniper paused briefly, scanning the valley below. The target was still out there somewhere, a ghost in the night. But their priority had shifted. Survival was paramount, but the mission still lingered in the back of her mind, a shadow she could not ignore. She glanced at the spotter, who nodded grimly, understanding the unspoken resolve between them. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, a massive explosion tearing through the ridge. Nearby rocks and dirt flew through the air, and the sniper was thrown to the ground. The spotter reached out, grabbing her arm, pulling her behind cover just as another blast echoed through the night. The enemy had found them, and they were closing in fast. The sniper's heart pounded as she scrambled to her feet. The spotter was all ready. scanning for threats, shouting directions over the roar of gunfire. They moved together, firing shots when necessary, picking their way through the chaos. Their teamwork was the only thing keeping them alive in this nightmare unfolding under the stars. Local guide suddenly appeared beside them, his face pale but determined. He pointed urgently toward a narrow path leading away from the fight. A chance at escape, but also a gamble with the unknown. The sniper hesitated only for a moment before following. The spotter and the guide down the perilous trail. The path twisted and turned, cutting through dense brush and rocky outcrops. The sniper could feel the enemy close behind their presence, a constant weight pressing against her back. Her finger remained, ready to fire every sense screaming alert. But the spotter's steady voice kept her focused, guiding her steps. The radio crackled with frantic voices, the extraction team desperate to locate them, but the signal was weak and fading. The sniper's mind raced, calculating the odds, the spotter beside her working feverishly to keep them on course. The night was a living enemy that refused to relent, and every moment was a battle against time and fear. Suddenly the guide stopped pulling them into a hidden cave concealed behind thick foliage. The sniper barely had time to catch her breath before gunfire erupted outside. The spotter slammed the cave entrance shut, plunging them into darkness. The local whispered urgently about a hidden tunnel that might lead them to safety. They moved cautiously through the narrow passage, the cold, damp walls closing in around them. The sniper's heart hammered as the sound of pursuit faded behind them, but the unknown lay ahead. A winding path twisting. Through the earth, a gauntlet of darkness and silence, where one wrong step could mean disaster. The spotter led the way, his flashlight cutting through the gloom, the sniper close behind her rifle, ready. Every sound echoed in the confined space, heightening their nerves. The tunnel seemed endless, winding deeper into the mountain, the air thick with dust and anticipation. Suddenly the passage opened into a small cavern illuminated by the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi. The surreal beauty was a stark contrast to the terror outside, but there was no time to admire. The spotter pulled out a map tracing their route toward an exit that promised salvation, but also uncertainty. The sniper glanced at the spotter, their eyes meeting in silent agreement. They had survived the night so far, but the fight was far from over. The darkness outside was replaced by the darkness within, but either way they had to keep moving toward whatever hope remained, and somewhere in the depths of the mountain, the enemy was not far behind, waiting ready to strike again. They ran through the tunnel hearts, racing shadows chasing them. The night was endless, but hope burned fiercely within.